is to give you an update on where search is in 2018 across the platform level, and deep dive into some code examples and some initiatives where SEO can help us drive inquiries and get more search traffic in. And a lot of it is really around, why does the SEO team suggest something? There's often a reason behind it which may make sense after this. So there's 5 things I'll quickly run through now in the next 30 minutes. How Google works in 2018, important page elements for web crawlers, map, site structure, duplicate content, and if we get time I'll run through JavaScript and SEO, and some server-side rendering, and lazy loading of images, and the impact of that on search. So how Google works, this is, you're all familiar with the front-end interface of Google Search. Behind the scenes, there's a series of web documents or scraped versions of each website Google finds. Before they can compile a list of search results, they have to fetch them from an index. Think of an index as a big filing cabinet full of every web page Google has found. So once you're in the index, you're hoping that all of your content can be found. And the step before that, to get in the index, the first step that's very critical to SEO is the Googlebot web crawler. So before you can worry about ranking and traffic, you have to worry about getting found, getting in the index, then worry about how your result is getting surfaced. So these are 3 very specific areas when you talk about SEO at the top level. Search, from the front end, is all about ranking and visibility. Search from an index point of view is all about making sure every content module, every piece of words, physical words on the page gets indexed. And from a crawling perspective, is our site accessible to Google? Can they actually fetch all the content? So discovery is key. So I'll run through each 3 parts of this. The key and the majority of work that we'll be doing is around crawling and understanding reasons why certain modules, certain code structures help crawling. So just by way of introduction, the search results page, it's no longer 10 blue links. I can remember the day there was just 10 links. If you rank number 1, you get 40% search traffic. Number 2, 20%, and it would filter off. That's no longer the case today. You'll notice 2 different browsers, 2 different machines will both see a different set of search results for the same query. Everyone sees a different set of results based on the location you're searching, your IP address, the device you're on, the browser, your logged in status. Google's dropping the search results down with an answer box at the top sometimes. They're putting paid ads in, map listings, and the mobile index is going to start to power the primary index. At the moment, mobile is powered by the desktop index in terms of ranking. That's all changing. And that's an example of how cluttered a generic keyword search for Canberra is. They pull in Google News as a knowledge graph. You've got an ad at the top, you've only got 2 results above the fold. And on mobile, they prioritize AMP pages, accelerated mobile pages, which is cached on Google's side. There's a Google News result, and then they're also filtering the carousel. So there's no longer 10 blue links, and this is becoming more and more prominent. Google is providing answers to popular questions above the fold, and we get to a world where there is no click. There's search results that fetch content, but they don't actually have a page impression. And that's a brave new world now for search. So moving on to indexing. Think of indexing as, how does Google think like a search engine in terms of each piece of content has to sit at a unique path called a URL. And in that path, they attribute value or search engine metrics at a URL level. That's why you probably hear SEOs banging on about, don't change your URL structure, it breaks SEO. That's the reason why, if this particular URL achieved, let's just say, a score of 30 against that URL, if you were to change and move it from advice to news, it would start at 0 again. All the backlinks, all the value that the search engine crawlers have attributed to that path is lost and have to start again as if it's a fresh URL. That's why doing 301 redirects from the old page to the new one helps transfer some of that value. But if you think about that, it's a filing cabinet contains a website domain, the folder of content within that domain, and the file or document that Google ranks. So Google actually ranks web pages, not websites. A website is a collection of pages. And an example of the index, if you were to search for Canberra median house price, you'll see the All Homes result. Next to that little down arrow chevron, there's the cache link. If you hit that, it will show you a copy of the page when Google last scraped it. Now this it's not a hard and fast rule. It can be different, especially if you're using React.js. It might fetch something slightly differently. This is the general indication of the date and the time though. So this can tell you when was the last time you crawled it. Is it a year old? Is it a day old or an hour old? So the last section is crawling. And this is really around, you'll hear terms like crawl budget, crawl rate limits, crawl demand. What this basically means is if you were to write a Python script or a PHP fetch get request to a page, you can't fetch every single page on the web without running into some crawl rate limits. You don't want to send Googlebot to take a site down from denial of service attack by pinging it too often. So they set a various limit based on the number of new pages they find. They also put a crawl demand against each piece of content. So it's no use crawling one page that hasn't been touched for 12 months. Why crawl it every day if the content's not changing? Come back less frequently. So at each domain level, there's a crawl rate limit, and there's also a crawl demand, which is the time they spend on each unique piece of content. And one of the biggest problems is 404 links as Google's crawling. If you set up a web crawler to fetch a bunch of pages, it has to handle URL locations that previously exist but no longer do. When they hit the 404 bucket, you're wasting crawl budget off to all these 404 pages that could be used finding new pages. So the way search crawlers work is they like a logical site structure. It has to give a correct response code to 200 OK. A fast loading page means they get to crawl more pages during their crawl session. They love using XML sitemaps to find new content. They like seeing everything on the page, and they want one clear URL, not multiple URLs with the same content. And obviously things they dislike, this is pretty self-explanatory. Being lied to, don't include links in your sitemap to other websites that aren't yours. Or don't include links that reference another canonical owner because it sends them on another track. They often go around in circles, crawling redirect chains. Any hidden or blocked content slows them down. Any uncrawlable URLs slows them down even more. And duplicate URLs causes an issue where you can often have 2 or 3 pages of the same content. Google has to put only one in the index step. So as it's fetching them, it might find all 3, but only one makes it into the index. So having duplicate URLs is quite bad. Often the wrong page ranks. The second start page here is about the importance of the web elements for web crawlers. Now I always make this joke that SEO doesn't stand for search engine optimization. It stands for simple, easy, obvious. Because the simplest page ranks the strongest. If you were to create a crawler to crawl this web page, it's so easy to parse the content, fetch the contents of a list tag or a paragraph tag or a div tag. If I want to know what the title is, it's very easy. Everything's marked up with plain HTML. And that's why the search results is powered by the title tag. It's shown as the title of the search result listing. The snippet of text below it is generally taken from the meta description tag in the head. But if you write a truly terrible meta description tag, it will pick a snippet of page text in the body instead of it. So in this example, you'll see the description for how to become a property developer is knocking down and rebuilding for profit a guaranteed way to, as you can see, there's nothing there about property development, how to. So Google grabs further down, it grabs a list once your application is approved. So that are two key areas that Google heavily looks at, is the title. The core phrase that you want to rank for should be in the title. Keep it around 55 character limits, because after that it gets truncated and Google can't display it to the user. The meta description doesn't help the page rank, it helps get click-through rate. If you can write a compelling snippet of text that Google shows below it, it will differentiate your search result from the other search results, and then you can see a correlation effect. The more people that click your result means it can rank higher purely by other signals. Also, the reason to optimize a title tag is not only for search engines, it's for users as well. If you do a search for properties for sale in Richmond, which Richmond? There's one in Tassie, there's one in Victoria, there's one in New South Wales. Having the state or the postcode in the title would not only help search engines understand if this person is searching from Hobart, show them the Tasmanian one at the top, it helps differentiate it from users here as well. And this is a Allhomes example. And like I said, meta descriptions, if they're poorly written, Google picks up the body copy to display it. Heading tags, this is another important area that web crawlers focus on. They always try and find the H1. So they get the title of the page from the head section of the document. The on page in the body section, they look for the H1. Then they go down H2, H3, H4, and they give each one a different weighting. So having a H1 at the top of the page and only one H1 helps the crawlers find the content without confusing them. If you're going to use multiple headings, have them in order of priority and nest them under each section. Here's a classic example when it goes horribly wrong. The suburb page for Homebush has it in a H1, which is great. The next tag down is a H4, then there's a H6, then a H2, then a H6, then a H4, then a H2. So as a web crawler scans this document, it does grab Homebush as the H1 first, but then it's wondering why the postcode is more important than the demographics. Is demographics second or third? And often they give up looking at H1, H2, H3 as a signal. Open graph tags. Another area that, especially Google partnered with Facebook on this as well. They support the OG image tag, the OG title, the OG description. They read it, they crawl it. It also helps the page when it gets shared on social media, that you get the right brand message, gets picked up. So third section, sitemaps and site structure. XML sitemaps are important because you want to elevate which pages Google finds first. So new listing pages, you want them to be crawled the same day, whereas a piece of content that sits for 12 months in a state of the market bucket somewhere every quarter, that can be less prominent. And again, sitemaps shouldn't have more than 10,000 links. If they do, you have to split them into sitemaps. So it's multiple sitemaps inside a sitemap. And try not put URLs in them that 301. They should just be URLs that 200 OK. Means Google can get right through the list fast without following a redirect. And obviously URLs that have a no index tag, don't include them in your sitemap, or Google will try and index them and you're wasting crawl time again. The no index tag, this is used to, Google will still crawl the page, but it won't pass it on to the index, which means it shouldn't turn up in the search results because Google's not going to keep a copy of it. The no index follow means crawl the page, but don't index it, but follow the links on the page. And at the end of the day, Google can be summarized at a back end. It's basically a glorified link crawler. It's a script that looks at all the Ahrefs on the page and puts it in a bucket or a queue, and it goes one by one, fetches that, notes that it came from that one, and then attributes rank based on that page back to that page. So that's what it does at a very granular level. And this is where tags in the header, like the canonical tag, can help the Google crawler pick the right page to crawl, rather than crawling 100 pages that all reference the same one canonical URL. They'll just go and follow the canonical. Redirects are very important. If it's a 301, Google will fast track it'll crawl that straight away. If it's a 302 temporary redirect, it hits, it will actually slow the crawler down and it will attempt to come back to that job. And because it's a temporary, it'll try and fetch it again. Once it hits the 302 a number of times, it may even slow down crawling that page for a significant amount of time. So always try and use 301s when you're moving content or redirecting permanently. Avoiding redirect chains is key to speeding up the amount of content Google can get through. Here's an example of one I discovered from an agency page. Google comes in at the top. It's real estate agencies, Highbury, Carriel Real Estate. The 301s to the secure URL, which is fine. But then you'll notice it's all in uppercase. So then at 301s to the lowercase, then you'll notice it redirects to the lowercase trailing slash. Then from that, it redirects to the same URL with the agent ID again in the URL. So if you're a web crawler and you're trying to write a script to fetch one page, you're sending it on 4 hops to finally get to the page rather than just sending it through. And there's legitimate reasons for these redirects, but often there's legacy redirects in the system that we have to look at, which is why looking at a log file can help the SEO team figure out which redirects can we get rid of or can we ignore in the middle. And that's another piece of work we're going to try and get into and have a look at. Ultimately, you want them to come in, hit the page, only one redirect, 200 OK to the right page. That's in a perfect world. But just be aware redirect chains are horrendous for web crawlers. And the robots text file, which sits in the root domain, this allows you to tell Google not to go to a certain folder and to not crawl pages in there. So lastly in here, site structure is very important for web crawlers. They like to understand the hierarchy of the site. If something's 3 clicks away from the homepage, which is 3 folders or 3 paths away, it will often get crawled more than one that's 5 or 6 clicks from the homepage. And this is an example of why that's the case. If it was to come in from the homepage, crawls the navigation pages and hits all the second level, it gets to all of them in one crawl. If it has to navigate down the middle here, it's a deeper site, it has to do more hops to find the same page that sits deeper in the site. And finally, if we have static landing pages for like email marketing campaigns or microsites, they may not be linked anywhere in the main site. So Google may not even find them or discover them during the crawl process. If they're not in the sitemap file, if navigation doesn't link to it, it has trouble getting to these pages like orphaned pages. The trailing slash as well is important. It doesn't matter if it's trailing slash or without, as long as the whole site is consistent. And as you saw in that other example, there was a redirect chain with this trailing slash to without. The reason for that is search engines treat trailing slash and non-trailing slash as 2 separate paths. So if we have it consistent across the whole site, I think at the moment the product section on the other WordPress domain has it. I think the advice section doesn't. So that's an area we'll look at. Also HTTPS versus HTTP, 2 separate URLs, www, non-www, they treat them both differently. As long as we have one preferred URL structure across the whole site, it makes it easy. Internal linking as well. Pages that get linked to more tend to be found faster and found more often, and are generally more authoritative pages for search crawlers. There's an example here of the All Homes navigation. Whenever you do a site redesign, you've not only got to think about how users navigate, which buttons they press and how they get to deep parts, but Google Search Crawler is also using your site. So Googlebot is a user of your site. So make sure all the links are in Ahrefs tags and designed with a user and a search engine in mind. Can a search engine get there? Now breadcrumbs are good for search. It indicates the position of that page within the overall site hierarchy. It also gives a web crawler an opt-out. If they get stuck in an endless loop in this section here, they can navigate back to the New South Wales page because it knows about it. It's a link on the page. The benefits of breadcrumbs, it allows a user to gain a sense of where they sit through the whole site. It also reinforces the internal linking structure. Google takes note of that. The best practice of that is to ensure the breadcrumb trail reflects the same site structure and website hierarchy, including the full navigation path in breadcrumbs should be done. If you skip a level, it often gets the web crawlers that try to figure out why that section isn't important, and they may come back even less to that section. Adding schema markup that breadcrumb trail displays in Google search results, which I'll show you here on the next slide. And the internal links as well in the footer. If you generate them dynamically, make sure you can still access them with JavaScript turned off. Often, not only Googlebot, but there's some other search crawlers which can't actually execute JavaScript, and I'll get to that in a second as well. So duplicate content, there's a lot of reasons that occurs, often by mistake. The reason it's bad is you're wasting Google's time finding multiple copies of the same page. It also confuses which page they pick to rank. Here's an example of a duplicate content. So in this case, there's a studio, which is a category type. It also has a bedroom type of 0 bedrooms, because it's not a 1 bedroom, it's a studio. And using things like faceted navigation or select modules, it can often create a path where that sits. And in this case has a 0 bedroom URL and a studio URL, and then a studio URL. So all of those would essentially show the same content. But we should really pick one and have all the benefit of Google knowing this one page is for a Darlinghurst studio. Also thin content. If you send Googlebot to a page that doesn't have any content, you're wasting a crawl hop. You're also wasting their time trying to rank this page for something. And in this case here, if a property has no exact matches, it's a bad experience not only for Googlebot search crawler, but for the user who hits this page. It's ranking in the search results, they land on it, but there's nothing there. And lastly, image optimization. Google image search is completely separate to Google web search. It's a different crawler, it's a different web. The advantage though of Google images is, if you remember the index, there's the Google search page at the front, there's an index in the middle, and there's a web crawler on the end. During web crawling, if they get to the image, they can surface it up from the index in all these other spots. It might feature in the Google snippet at the top. It might feature in an image carousel. And obviously if it's indexed, the image will show in Google image search. And I'll cover lazy loading shortly. So alt tags, if you can have the address in the alt tag of the property, that helps the search crawlers know that this is an actual address location. Structured data, which is, we recommend JSON. And this is why residence, breadcrumbs, and inspections is probably the only 3 types that our content's most relevant for. You'll see here breadcrumb schema we went through. You'll notice that Google's displaying it in the search results. And this is very beneficial for mobile web users who don't have the app installed. They can quickly know which part of the site they're hitting. And I'm not sure, but I think, did breadcrumbs get taken off the old M site before it got decommissioned? I'm not sure, we'll come back to that. Inspection schema, it allows us to capture more real estate section of the search landing page. We can actually push the results down by showing the inspection times in there. So JavaScript and SEO. This is an official quote from Google, and as you can tell, Google's never going to tell you the full truth. Years ago, Google couldn't read JavaScript. They would just ignore anything that was .js. They would ignore your resources folders. They would just crawl the plain HTML with the plain text on the page. Then they realized there's a lot of content getting pulled using JavaScript. So they moved to the state where they can read JavaScript, but they don't execute it, which means they won't run the query, but they can read and follow the links in the JavaScript file. Now they move into a stage where they can actually read and execute the JavaScript. But it's generally not good to do that, because to fetch a JavaScript file, to fetch the ahrefs inside that file, to then set up a new Google crawl queue, means you're slowing down than just an ahref in the page. And this is what Google had said. Times have changed today. As long as you're not blocking Googlebot from crawl, your JavaScript or CSS, you're generally able to render and understand your web pages like modern browsers. So you'll notice the word there. This must have been written by their legal team. Generally able to. So there's an element of doubt there. If something is in JavaScript, they may or may not get it. If I was a plumber and I said, I could generally fix your taps, what does that? Doesn't incur a lot of confidence. So as a general rule, Google can read JavaScript, but they may not execute it. And some of the other search guidelines they actually tell you is it's always a good idea to have your site degrade gracefully. So can users and visitors view it with JavaScript disabled or off? Some other search engines cannot execute JavaScript yet. So yes, they can read it. Sometimes they might be able to execute it, but in all cases, simple, easy, obvious. If you can have an ahref link as plain HTML, it's much easier for the search crawlers. So some of the restraints around this is all the resources of the page, the JS, the CSS, the imagery, need to be available to be crawled, rendered, and indexed. So to get into Google's index, Google doesn't click the JavaScript buttons. It doesn't hit any on-load functions, any hovers or scrolls, but it will read the command. And obviously parsing content that requires a modern headless browser that has to run JavaScript in the background takes more time for them to fetch just a plain HTML version of the page. So that's another downside of using JS to render complete components, especially body copy. And it's also a lot slower. So last slide on this one here is indexable server-side, internal links, and ahrefs. Google still needs clean URLs to land on a page, regardless of how they're generated. They have to be static, non-changing, so they can get a 200 OK, and they can add search engine metrics to that page. Likewise, internal ahref links still need to be found, crawled, so they can add them to the index. And the last section here on the standard page requirements, if you were to have a cheat sheet of what a web crawler would love to have, they look at title, meta description, the page headings, they scan for the Open Graph tags, they look at schema markup, structured data, they check the robots meta tags, they check if there's a canonical version, and lastly they pull in the image source location and any alt tag information. So that's at a very top level what Google cares about. Last section is server-side rendering and lazy loading of images. With server-side rendering of links, breadcrumbs, footer links, and all links must load with JavaScript disabled. That's just a general practice so web crawlers can access the next page if they're not running JavaScript. Server rendering of content. Ensure all content modules expand by default with JavaScript disabled. Hidden content. I think everyone's moved past the days of hiding words in the page content, styling them over with white padding. Make your site content the same for Googlebot and for the user. And this one here is server rendering of images. There's a general rule to avoid lazy loading the property images, but I understand there's a trade-off between page speed and image search. So one of the recent things that happened was they removed, 31 tracking tags from all these marketing resource tags, and the page load time just suddenly plummeted. It was great. So avoiding lazy loading of images though means that you forego having your image shown up in these sections. It won't make it into Google Image Search, and although Google Image Search doesn't drive much traffic, it means that some of our content is now hidden. We can never be suggested in the search box with a picture of a property. we may not get content in the carousel. So at the bare minimum, if you're lazy loading image content, you at least want the lead image to be loaded for Googlebot. And also, if you've got any on-page data, such as property type, shower, parking spots, that kind of data with JavaScript enabled is great for the user. For a search engine trying to crawl that, they see what's 5 mean, what's 3 mean, what's 1 mean, what's 2 mean. The web crawler can't figure it out. So if you're pulling in images for property icons, make sure they're server-side rendered, and try and use a descriptive alt tag. It just helps the web crawlers understand what this image is about. So here's this is the last example here. We've got 7 minutes left. This is a classic example of how a simple, easy change can make a tangible difference to not only traffic, but visibility in search results. So the state of the market reports that come out quarterly. We did a quick audit of last year's one and noticed that the title tag had a trailing section of domain, the hyphen, then product, and we're wasting all this extra space in the title on just the brand and the product section. People aren't searching product. So we dropped the product out of the title, improved the naming convention to make sure it had state of the market in the title, or at least domain house price report as people were searching. The meta description, there currently was not one, so Google was crawling this page and just randomly selecting any piece of content it found on the page and showing it as a snippet of text. And we were getting some really bad brand messages showing up in the search results. And the H1 heading tag, there was 10 of them. So every subcategory in every property, so Sydney, Hobart, Brisbane, Canberra, they were all wrapped in H1 tags. And as such, the web crawlers weren't able to fully fetch all the parts of the page, including the property data, the tables, the median house price. So we jumped into WordPress, changed these things, amended the title. I think it was SEO Yoast. We had changed the excerpt tag, which is the meta description. Changed all the H1s to H2s and just kept the main heading as the H1. And the result was this. For the first time, Google picked up a 0 snippet position. They picked up the table because now they know that this is about Sydney house price report. They grabbed a random suburb on the page, they pulled in the property data as the table and showed it at a featured snippet level, while also improving the ranking of the core page, number 2 organic below it. So we get 2 spots in the search results by making a title tag tweak, a H1 audit of the H1 tags, and making sure there was a meta description in place. And that just goes to show that a very, very simple, easy, obvious HTML code can result in this kind of thing, which should now be scalable. For each quarter now, they're just going to copy that code and update it with the new report. We don't have to do this from now on. It's just there. It's ready to go. And that's a final example that shows you how easy it is to get things prominent in search results with little to no effort. But you've just got to think like a search engine. How would Google crawl this module? How do they pick the content out and how do they stick it in the index before they even worry about ranking? So getting the content in is the biggest battle we've got, considering how many live listings go out each week. So should you want to contact us, just hit us up on Slack on that. If you want to book some one-on-one training, or if you want long questions answered, just come up and grab us on level 5, or I'm going to start spending more time on level 1 as well. We can email us at SEO@domain. And thank you for coming. I hope it was helpful. And if you want to deep dive into any other specific topics, I know that Corinne and Carla have been doing UX ones, just with the UX team, around design and building for search crawlers as well. But definitely, yeah, keep us in the loop with anything you want SEO advice on. Any questions?
Another one?
Yeah.
So in the search results, you're saying like a bad show when there's no results, or it doesn't provide any useful information for the user, and obviously they don't want to sort of crawl in that So when that kind of stuff can change like every 5 minutes, like there could be listings, there couldn't be listings, like it all depends, like how do you...
Yeah, it's tough. It's a very tough thing, and the reason it is if people hit that page, they would bounce. They hit the back arrow in their browser, they end up back on the search results page. Google looks at the JavaScript call from the search results for the bounce rate. So because it sends that negative signal, it means the page will no longer rank prominently. But determining if there's listings on there before you show it is a challenge. I think it's more around new property sections. If you were to open up like new devs, or open up a new school catchment page for a suburb that has no live listings, we could potentially stick an index tag on it until we have listings. For the core suburb and sections, we generally don't run into that. It's more for the new devs or building profiles, which may come and go often, but it's difficult to do. You just don't want to make sure that happens across the whole site. If we suddenly have suburbs with 0 bedrooms across the whole of New South Wales and they all have a URL, we want to spot those and maybe figure out a way to stop Google crawling them and then make it into the index. That's a good question. That's an ongoing battle, figuring out the logic about how to handle that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's all about that. That's great. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I in a side project, I had like a single page app, so it was all rendered in the client. And I just made a couple like interesting observations I was just going to shout out. Like, one was that like, not only is JavaScript like at Google rendering loading the JavaScript when it crawls, but I was also really surprised to see it's actually quite patient. So I had on my product pages, like my body copy is taking about a second to load, so there's a separate fetch that happens in the browser after the page and the JavaScript is loaded. It goes and gets the product data, and I couldn't believe that it was indexing everything, even after like it took a second to grab it. So I thought that Google's been quite nice in that sense.
They've improved a lot, yes.
But like, and I fully agree with the whole gendering thing. Someone like Domain, you can't know where that's acceptable. But I was just interesting to notice it. And the other thing I noticed as well is like when I did this single page app that didn't change the title and the meta description tag within the page, Google just did not index it at all. And then I came along and just wrote JavaScript to change the title and meta description tag, and then it started seeing its separate pages. It's a bit pushed there. Yeah, it's interesting to see what's happening in that kind of space.
And that's the thing, they've got to deal with websites that have no previous SEO knowledge, or CMS systems that just generate these pages with no thought for the name of it. And if you think like a search engine, if a user gives it a title, what better use as a ranking signal than the author of that page, what they called it? So that's why it's just a general practice, each page has to have a unique title. It helps Google differentiate it in its index, and it stops them either not including an index or picking the right page at least. Like that Richmond example, stick the suburb in or the postcode to help it differentiate from other Richmonds. And yes, they are very patient with JavaScript. You can leave them hang on the site for a while and they'll just repeatedly come back, or delay it a minute and they'll keep doing it.
Yeah.
It's good playing around with stuff like that, because Google doesn't tell you how they do it.
No, that's what I wanted to say, because I was like proper watching it. I was like, they're not there, I'll change this, now they're there. So it was cool to have that like direct feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also what you were saying about you said you postfix the title with, like it's very common for people to do dash, like name of company.
Yep.
Are you saying as a general rule, just don't bother doing that? No.
Oh, that example was domain-product at the end.
Right. Okay.
So we're wasting characters in the title tag. You've only got 55 characters that are going to be visible.
Yeah.
And I think it had some horrific name that didn't say the word property. It didn't say state of the market, it didn't say house price, but it had a trailing domain-product. And product is just a section of the site. It's not nothing to help the search engine or the user. So we just stripped that off. We left the domain trailing on it. We then called it, I think it was State of the Market, December 2017,
Dash.
House Price Report / domain.
Right, okay, cool.
So you just got to try and figure out a way to get your message in the first 55 characters. That makes sense for what it should rank for. And it's the old problem when you do a website audit, people go, why aren't I ranking for this phrase? And you say, well, show me somewhere in your website one page that has that phrase in its title, its body copy. If you're not using it, Google can't make it relevant for it. So at least help them out with a good title. It goes a long way. A good title and one H1 per page helps them tremendously.
Yeah.
Because they're simple, dumb web crawlers which just follow Ahrefs links and they pass documents and strip content out. That's all they do. Then the algorithm which determines which part to show and what to do is a whole nother session. Any other questions?
Yeah, so one more.
Yeah.
Go back to sitemap XML. Like, if you have a page that has like really clear anchors, like, do you always need a sitemap, or if everything's if like the home page is linking to all the pages, you still need a sitemap?
Google always starts at the sitemap. I think it actually starts at the robots file because it wants to know where can't it crawl.
Right.
And if you have your sitemap link in the robots file, it then goes, right, start here.
Right.
It knows the buckets to ignore, then it jumps to the sitemap.
Yeah.
And often, most systems push the sitemap every few hours or something. So it knows it's hitting the first pages that are brand new. And if something's brand new, it tends to rank strong initially, because it's what Google calls it's the fresh index. If it's got a new timestamp and it's brand new, it'll elevate it to show it in case it's breaking news or in case it's really important. And then it also elevates old historical content that has lots of links and lots of shares. So it's a happy medium between brand new content and old authoritative content that has all these backlinks to it. There's a question about that,
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, I'm with this trading with visual data, like trivial ones, like multiple times. So for this kind of stuff, so what is the approach for us? Like, how do we sort of look at our pages and then see what these problems? So what we suggest, like, we just come here and just we go through the like our pages and then or
yeah, just message us when you spot one.
Yeah.
We just in the Chrome browser. Well, I think we've got this redirect checker thing. So if you hit a URL, it flashes and you click on it, it shows you the 5 hops. Grab the URL and just message it to us, and we'll take a look and see what logic is triggering it. Is it a section redirect? Is it a device redirect? Like, what's going on? We can investigate it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, there might be other problems like this, obviously. What is the approach for our team, for instance, to understand those problems and then just like do this kind of audits all the time? So, like, I haven't seen this problem, maybe I missed this one. But how do I get to know about these problems? Obviously, we just look at our web pages.
Yeah, so we're going to try and do regular site audits automatically, which will check how many redirect hops there are. The first thing we're doing is a log file review. So every hit that comes in from Googlebot user agent, how many 301s are we hitting, how many 302s, and we're going to reverse engineer it back to try and reduce the amount of redirects based on the Akamai server logic. If there's some things we can't touch, whether it's non-secure to secure or MDOT to dub, I'll stay, but often there's some section-based or folder-based redirects which we can clear out. If you spot something weird, definitely message it to us, and we'll jump on it and try and figure out what's going on, and then raise a Jira and try and get it in the sprint. But yeah, any other questions? Just message us up on there. I think we're going to be out of this room by 3 o'clock. There's some more people coming in. Thank you.